I always prided myself on being a rational man, a quiet, modest businessman who built a life from careful planning and trust. In Atlanta's buzzing streets and upscale neighborhoods, I was known as the steady, reliable one. I never imagined trust would become my downfall. But that scorching July beneath the southern sun, I sensed something was off in my marriage. Little suspicions began to gnaw at me, subtle as a whisper, yet impossible to ignore. It started with the little things. My wife Mary had become distant recently. She guarded her phone like a secret diary, snapping it away whenever I walked into the room. Her warm smiles turned into distracted nods. More nights came where she claimed to be out with friends or caught up at work, which was unusual given her regular schedule at the nonprofit she managed. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. After all, Mary had always been loyal, or so I believed, and I had no reason to doubt her. But the seed of doubt was planted. One evening, Mary came home late, nearly 10 p.m. I was in the kitchen of our suburban Buckhead home, pretending to tinker with a late dinner. When she entered, her hair slightly disheveled and cheeks flushed, she offered a ready-made excuse about an impromptu girls' night. It was Carol's birthday. We lost track of time, she said lightly, avoiding my eyes. I nodded, but inside I felt a sting. Carol had actually texted me that afternoon asking if Mary was free for a catch-up next week. Mary clearly hadn't been with Carol. My suspicions deepened. The lies were starting. Another incident, I noticed Mary's credit card statement on our kitchen counter one morning. A rare slip, as she usually kept those things to herself. A charge from the St. Regis Atlanta Hotel in Buckhead caught my eye. It was dated a Friday 2 weeks prior, supposedly when she was shopping with a coworker. The St. Regis is an upscale hotel, not exactly a shopping mall. My throat tightened as I stared at the entry. I didn't mention it then, but the number $212 for room service on that bill burned in my mind. I began observing more carefully. Mary's phone buzzed often with incoming texts that she answered out of earshot. Once, a name flashed briefly on her screen before she clicked it off. Dan R. Dan Roberts was my close friend and colleague, the last person I'd suspect in any unusual context. He was my business partner in an investment firm I co-founded. Dan had been a friend for over a decade. He'd stood beside me at our wedding. Surely that Dan couldn't be the one texting at 10 p.m.? Probably just work-related, I told myself. Dan and I talked daily, but he never mentioned chatting with Mary. Yet, that night as I lay in bed next to Mary, who pretended to fall asleep immediately, a terrible thought struck. Could it be Dan? I dismissed it as paranoia. Dan was married too, and our families were close. But once the thought surfaced, it refused to vanish. I recalled how Dan had been around a lot recently, dropping by unannounced or inviting Mary and me out separately. At a cookout a month ago, I'd noticed them laughing in a corner, heads close. I'd chalked it up to friendly banter at the time. Now it replayed in my head with a more sinister hue. I felt a cold sweat. If my instincts were right, this wasn't just a stranger or nameless fling. This was a betrayal from two people I deeply cared about. The possibility alone made my stomach churn. I spent hours that night staring at the ceiling, listening to Mary's soft breathing, wondering if everything I knew was a lie. The next day at work, I kept a close eye on Dan. We shared a corner office space in Midtown Atlanta with a view of the skyline. Normally, we'd chat about clients or grab lunch. That day, I noticed he avoided eye contact a bit, buried in his screen. Perhaps I was imagining it, but when his phone buzzed around mid-morning, he quickly silenced it and shot a quick glance my way. Why is he jumpy? I wondered. My suspicion escalated from a whisper to a constant background noise. That afternoon, I decided to perform a little test. I texted Mary. Working late, big project. We'll grab dinner at the office. This was a lie. I had no such project. My heart pounded as I hit send, a part of me praying she'd simply reply with a normal, "Okay, see you later, love you," and spend a quiet evening at home. Instead, her reply was quick, "Oh, okay. I might turn in early then, not feeling great." Not feeling great? She'd seemed fine this morning. My pulse quickened. I told Dan I was heading out early. He looked at me strangely. After all, I'd just told Mary I was working late, but I kept my face neutral. "Headache," I muttered. Dan nodded slowly. As I left, I swear I saw him pick up his phone, face turned away from me. A thrill of adrenaline mixed with dread coursed through my veins. Instead of going home, I parked my car a few blocks from our house where I had a view of the front door. If something was truly amiss, maybe Mary would use this chance. The humid evening air clung to me as I waited, anxiety building. Around 6:30 p.m., I saw our driveway gate open. Mary's car backed out and drove off. She hadn't mentioned going out. Not feeling great, huh? I tailed her at a cautious distance through Atlanta's side streets. My hands gripped the wheel tightly. She headed north, and when she took the exit toward Midtown, my heart sank further. Eventually, she pulled into a parking lot of a cozy Italian restaurant, La Tavola Trattoria, known for intimate dinners. I parked discreetly down the block and watched. Mary stepped out of her car, glancing around as if nervous. Moments later, another car I recognized, Dan's black Audi, rolled in and parked 2 spaces from her. Dan got out and walked straight to Mary. Even from my distance, I saw Mary's face light up. She approached, and, in the golden glow of the restaurant's neon sign, they kissed. My world stopped for a second. Even though I had suspected it, seeing it in the flesh was like a knife through my chest. There was my wife of 7 years and my best friend wrapped in each other's arms in a public parking lot, acting like love-struck teenagers. I felt like I might be sick. I fumbled for my phone, hands trembling, and snapped a couple of photos through the windshield. The images were grainy in the twilight, but clearly showed their silhouettes together. Damning evidence. My breathing was shallow and ragged as I fought to keep control. Confront them now. A primal part of me wanted to storm over, fists clenched, and demand answers in the parking lot. I could picture myself grabbing Dan by the collar, shouting every ounce of betrayal I felt. My heart hammered at the thought, but another part of me, the rational, calculating part, stopped me. If I confronted them here, it would be an explosion of emotion, a shouting match on the street. They'd deny, lie, or perhaps worse, come clean, and then what? Mary would cry, Dan would apologize, maybe a scuffle. It would be chaos, and then over. They'd know I knew, and I'd lose the element of surprise. So I did nothing. I shrank back into my car's shadow, watching them go inside the restaurant arm in arm. I sat there alone in the darkening car, my world crashing down around me. Inside, I felt a crack, an emotional fracture running through everything I believed about my life. Mary's laughter, Dan's friendship, all those moments we'd shared as couples. Now I questioned each memory, tainted by their deceit. My hands shook uncontrollably on the steering wheel. Anger boiled beneath the shock. Hot, seething anger like I'd never felt before. It took every ounce of willpower not to charge in and confront them. Instead, I closed my eyes and took a slow breath. Not yet. Not like this. I needed proof, undeniable proof, and a plan. If this was truly happening, they were both about to learn they picked the wrong man to betray. That night, I waited until Mary and Dan finished their rendezvous. It took about 2 hours. I watched them exit the restaurant, hand in hand under the streetlights, Mary resting her head briefly on his shoulder. They looked comfortable, even happy. The sight made me clench my jaw so hard it hurt. I kept taking photos with my phone, each one a nail in the coffin of my marriage. When they finally parted, Mary heading back to her car with a goodbye peck on Dan's cheek, I sank low to avoid being seen. Mary drove off, and Dan lingered a moment, a satisfied grin visible on his face, even from afar, before he headed to his car. I stayed until both were gone, then I allowed myself a moment. Alone in that empty parking lot, I gripped the steering wheel and sobbed. Tears of rage, humiliation, heartbreak, an emotional flood I had never experienced. It all came out in harsh, choking gasps. In the span of a few hours, my reality had shattered. But amid the anguish, a thought flickered. This isn't over. I wiped my face with a trembling hand. If I went home now, I'd have to face Mary, pretend nothing was wrong. Could I do that? I had to try. Taking a few minutes to collect myself, I rehearsed a neutral expression in the rearview mirror. I'd been deceived, but from this moment on, I would become the deceiver if needed. When I finally walked into our house, it was almost 10 p.m. Mary was in the living room, curled on the sofa with a book, wearing her pajamas. She glanced up, eyes a little wide, maybe surprised I was home early after claiming I'd work late. "You're home," she said softly. Was that guilt I saw flash across her face, or was I projecting? "Yeah," I replied, voice steady somehow. "Headache got worse, so I cut it short. Thought I'd get some rest." I forced a tired smile. She stood and came over, and for a moment I tensed, fearing she'd notice something off, my red eyes or the tension in my body. But she just placed a cool hand on my forehead lightly. "You do feel a bit warm. I'm sorry you're not feeling well." Her concern seemed genuine on the surface, but I couldn't forget where she'd been an hour ago. My skin crawled at her touch, remembering that same hand was likely on Dan's arm tonight. "I'll be fine," I said, stepping back under the pretense of moving to the fridge for water. I couldn't stand her touching me. "Just need sleep." She nodded and went to tidy up the sofa. No mention that she'd gone out, no explanation beyond the earlier lie. I observed her subtly. She looked calm, like nothing was wrong. But I noticed she'd done her hair nicely, and I caught a whiff of her expensive Chanel Chance perfume. Mary rarely wore that except for special occasions. A romantic dinner qualifies, I guess, I thought bitterly. That night I barely slept. Mary slept soundly beside me, as if guilt had no purchase on her conscience. I lay rigid, staring at the ceiling. A whirlwind of betrayal and fury swirled in my mind. I knew with a cold certainty my life would never be the same. But one conviction crystallized by dawn. I would not be a victim. I wouldn't simply confront them and then lick my wounds in some divorce. No, they had made me suffer in ignorance. Now it was their turn. In those dark hours, a plan began to take shape in my head. Raw, unformed, but there. I was going to methodically, ruthlessly make them pay for what they'd done. I turned quietly on my side, watching Mary's sleeping face in the dim early light. Once, that face would fill me with love and comfort. Now it only ignited a steely resolve within me. "Enjoy the peace while you can, Mary," I thought to myself with grim finality. A storm is coming. Chapter 2. The Breaking Point. The next morning, I awoke with swollen eyes and a pounding heart. Mary was already up, humming softly in the bathroom shower as if it were any other day. I stared at the ceiling, recalling every detail of the previous night's revelation. Part of me still hoped it was a nightmare, that I'd wake to find my fears baseless. But the images on my phone's camera roll told the truth. My wife and my best friend locked in an embrace, oblivious to the world around them. I felt a surge of anger so intense it coursed like fire through my veins. Yet I forced myself into a state of eerie calm. I had to maintain composure. Storming in on Mary while she showered, demanding answers, might provide a moment of satisfaction, but it wouldn't achieve what I truly craved. I didn't want just the truth. I wanted justice, retribution. I wanted them ruined for what they did to me. Still, the emotional toll was heavy. As I dressed for work, my hands trembled while buttoning my shirt. In the mirror, I saw a man whose eyes had lost their usual warmth, replaced by cold determination and hurt. If Mary noticed, she didn't let on. Over a quick breakfast, Mary acted perfectly normal. She wore a light summer dress and sipped her coffee, scrolling on her phone. I wondered if she was texting him. Every benign comment she made, "We're low on milk, could you pick some up?" struck me as absurd given the circumstances. How could she sit there so calmly? Was she that good a liar? Or did she truly feel nothing about betraying me? I mumbled something affirmative about the milk. My voice sounded distant to my own ears. I was holding back a dam of emotion behind a thin facade. I realized I needed a release, some way to vent safely, or I would crack and tip my hand too soon. As Mary left for her office, she gave me a peck on the cheek. I stiffened involuntarily. Her touch felt wrong now. If she noticed, she didn't comment, just flashed a quick smile and headed out. I watched from the doorway as she drove off, feeling a mix of heartbreak and revulsion. Once her car disappeared around the corner, I closed the door and leaned against it, sliding down to the floor. Alone in the house, I broke down. A grown man, a successful professional, reduced to silent, heaving sobs on the foyer floor. I pressed my palms into my eyes, as if that could halt the tears. Thoughts spiraled. How could she? How could they? The double betrayal cut so deep I felt physically ill. I dry heaved and had to steady myself on the wall to stand. Memories flooded me. Mary and I dancing at our wedding under twinkling lights while Dan clinked champagne glasses with the guests in celebration. The weekend barbecues where Dan and I manned the grill, and Mary laughed with Dan's wife, Linda, by the pool. Yes, Linda. God, she was my friend too. Did she know her husband was a snake? Probably not. The betrayal was a spiderweb entangling more than just me. I realized with a heavy heart that confronting this affair meant shattering more lives than one, but that was on them, not me. They set this in motion when they broke their vows and our trust. I steadied myself. I needed to function today, at least enough to set the wheels in motion for what came next. I decided to call in sick to work. Facing Dan at the office today was out of the question. I might have strangled him with my bare hands. I texted him and a couple of other colleagues. Feeling really under the weather, taking a sick day. Dan replied quickly, "No worries. Rest up, man." The gall of his casual concern almost made me chuck my phone across the room. I set it down before I gave myself away with an angry retort. Let him think I'm none the wiser. Instead of stewing at home, I needed to do something. Action was my antidote to despair. I grabbed my laptop and sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where I'd seen Mary's incriminating hotel charge. My coffee grew cold as I started researching with single-minded focus. If I was going to wage a war of revenge, I needed information and I needed a plan as calculating as humanly possible. First, I looked into divorce laws in Georgia. I needed to know exactly what the legal stakes were. The betrayal felt personal, but divorce would inevitably be a legal battle too. Within minutes, I found something that made my heart leap in grim satisfaction. Under Georgia law, if a spouse is proven to have committed adultery, they are barred from receiving alimony. The words burned into my brain. Mary wouldn't get a dime of support from me if I could prove her affair. It was a small victory to seize upon in that dark moment. I dug deeper. Adultery in Georgia was technically a crime, a misdemeanor, though rarely. That was an interesting tidbit. While I doubted the state would throw Mary or Dan in jail for sleeping together, the law apparently hadn't been enforced in a century, the symbolic fact that what they did was actually illegal comforted me. They broke more than vows, they broke the law, however archaic. I also found that judges often favored the wronged spouse in dividing assets, especially if marital funds were spent on the affair. If Dan had lavished gifts or trips on Mary, or if she had used our money for her trysts, I could leverage that. Every detail I uncovered was like a weapon to add to my growing arsenal. One article from a Savannah law firm talked about strategies in adultery cases. It spoke of being patient and strategic, likening a good approach to that of a wolf rather than an impulsive predator. The wolf analogy resonated deeply. Ambush predators rely on a quick, chaotic strike, but a wolf is patient, studying its prey for weaknesses before relentlessly pursuing. That line lit up in my mind. It was exactly what I needed to become. Calculating, patient, and willing to do whatever it takes to win. I made a note of those words. I realized I would need professionals on my side. I typed in searches for private investigators in Atlanta who specialize in infidelity. The results were plentiful. Apparently, cheating spouses are a thriving business. One law blog emphasized how powerful concrete evidence like photos or videos can be in court, and how PIs are adept at gathering such proof. I already had a few photos, but they were amateur work. To really cover my bases, I'd want more undeniable evidence. Maybe even catch them in the act in a hotel. The thought of seeing more was painful, but I steeled myself. Short-term pain for long-term victory. By mid-morning, I had compiled a folder of notes, legal points, steps to take, contacts of investigators and divorce attorneys. Each click and keystroke gradually shifted my anguish into a cold, focused resolve. I was crafting the blueprint of their destruction. At one point, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the darkened laptop screen during a break. My eyes were bloodshot, but had a steely glint. It frightened me a little. This wasn't the easygoing, trusting man I usually was. This was someone else, someone hardened. Maybe that's what betrayal does, forges a new persona out of the ashes of the old. If so, then so be it. The old me was gone. The new me had work to do. I phoned into a PI firm that had good reviews for being discreet. A woman's voice answered, brisk and professional. "Martinelli Investigations, how can we help you?" I need to inquire about surveillance services," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Regarding a potential infidelity case." She didn't miss a beat. In fact, her tone softened slightly, as if she heard the pain under my words. "I'm sorry to hear that, sir. We handle many such cases. We can absolutely help gather evidence. Would you like to schedule a consultation with one of our investigators? It can even be today." Efficiency. Exactly what I needed. We arranged a meeting for that afternoon at their discreet office in a small office park. Before I left, I gathered every piece of potential evidence I already had. The photos on my phone, which I transferred to a secure drive, copies of our phone bills. I realized I could download our mobile statement online. Sure enough, dozens of late-night texts and calls between Mary's and Dan's numbers showed up, though content unknown, and that credit card statement with the hotel charge. I also took one of Mary's business cards from her desk. I remembered that her nonprofit's office had a security sign-in system. If she'd been meeting Dan instead of being at work sometimes, maybe her office logs or card swipes could reveal absences. I wasn't sure how I'd get that info yet, but it was a thought. Before heading out, I stopped and looked around my home. Our home. The framed wedding photo on the mantel nearly made me crack again. Mary in her ivory gown, me in a tux. Both of us beaming as we walked down the aisle, Dan standing just off to the side, clapping. What a picture-perfect lie. I turned the frame face down on the mantel. I couldn't bear to look at it now. I arrived at the PI's office, a nondescript beige building, and was greeted by a middle-aged investigator named Rob. He had the firm handshake and world-weary eyes of someone who'd seen this scenario 100 times. Still, he listened carefully as I, haltingly at first then with growing confidence, laid out my situation. My wife is cheating on me. With my best friend, I said quietly in his small office. The words tasted bitter. I have some proof already. I showed him the photos and the phone logs. Rob nodded, taking a few notes. You've done well so far. I know it's hard, he said. We can absolutely get you more evidence. What outcome are you looking for? I paused. Outcome. That single word held multitudes. I want evidence for divorce proceedings, definitely, I said. But beyond that, I weighed how much to reveal. Would he judge me if I told him I wanted to ruin them? PIs probably see vengeful spouses all the time. So I continued, choosing my words. I want to gather as much as possible, not just to prove the affair for a favorable divorce settlement, but also to see if there's anything legally or reputationally that could hurt them. I suspect my business partner, this man, is also doing other dishonest things. If he's betraying me personally, maybe professionally too. It wasn't a lie. Dan and I had a small investment firm and he handled a lot of our finances as the CFO. If he was betraying one trust, why not another? Rob's eyes narrowed shrewdly. Understood. We can investigate discreetly. Perhaps some financial background checks on him, surveillance on both to see if they meet during times they shouldn't. If we catch them at a hotel or something on video, would that help? Yes, I replied firmly. It would be like poison to see it, but I knew I needed to steel myself. I want it documented beyond doubt. Dates, times, pictures, everything. He leaned forward. We can also track their movements via GPS if you authorize it and can provide access to their vehicles. I thought of Mary's car. It was registered in both our names. I could probably slip a tracker into my wife's car, I said slowly. She trusts that I don't suspect anything, so she won't be looking for it. As for Dan's Audi, that might be harder, but maybe the PI could handle that if needed. We went over the costs and agreement. It felt surreal signing a contract to have my wife and friend tailed, but it also felt empowering. I was taking control. Before leaving, I hesitated, then asked, is it normal to want to completely upend their lives? I mean, I don't want to do anything illegal myself, but I want them to pay dearly. Rob studied me. Off the record? Many clients come in hurt and angry. Some just want evidence and a clean break. Others want a pound of flesh. It's not my place to judge, only to caution you. Ruining people can be a messy business. Just be sure you're ready for whatever comes from it. His words gave me a momentary pause. What comes from it? Perhaps he meant that revenge often has collateral damage or can consume the seeker. But I felt I had nothing to lose. My trust was shattered, my marriage likely over, my friendship dead. Whatever collateral damage came, it couldn't hurt me more than this already had. I'm ready, I replied quietly. They chose this. Now I'll choose the consequences. He nodded and extended his hand. We'll start immediately. I'll update you as we gather info. Leaving the PI's office, I felt a grim satisfaction. The preparation phase had begun. I was gathering allies, however transactional, in my secret war. If Mary and Dan's affair was a stealth attack on my life, then my response would be a full-on siege. I spent the rest of the day methodically laying groundwork. I called a lawyer, a well-regarded divorce attorney I found via a colleague's recommendation, using my car's Bluetooth so it wouldn't show on my cell log, just in case Mary ever got curious. The attorney, Angela Watkins, agreed to meet me later that week for an initial consultation. I told her only that I was preparing for a possible divorce and suspected adultery. She assured me to bring any evidence and we'd discuss strategy in detail. Next, I thought about finances. Mary and I had a joint savings account and our house was jointly owned. I had separate accounts for my business and personal investments. My mind was racing. If she found out I knew, would she try to drain accounts or hide money? Possibly, if she were cunning. I needed to ensure she couldn't hurt me financially when this blew up. I moved half of our joint savings into a new account solely in my name. Legally, it was still marital asset, but I'd account for it later. For now, I just wanted to prevent any sudden disappearance of funds. I also changed the passwords on our online banking and my personal credit cards. For the house, I began quietly assembling documents, deed, mortgage statements, anticipating a battle over it. Throughout this flurry of activity, my emotions swung between cold focus and waves of hurt. At moments, I'd find myself staring blankly, recalling a tender moment with Mary from years ago, and feel tears threaten. But then I'd harden my heart with a mantra. She made her choice, now make yours. By the time evening rolled around, I felt exhausted but more in control than that morning. Mary texted that she'd be a bit late, claiming she had a ton of paperwork to finish up. I wondered if that was code for another meetup with Dan. Possibly, but given they met last night, maybe not today. Even adulterers have schedules. Regardless, I passed that intel to Rob via a quick call, and he said he'd have someone check if she really was at her office or elsewhere. When Mary did come home, about 8 o'clock p.m., I was in the kitchen stirring a pot of chili I'd thrown together to keep myself busy. She looked a bit tired, maybe even uneasy. I searched her face for any sign that she suspected something off about me. I'd barely spoken to her all day except a short text at lunch that I was feeling a bit better. "Hey, how are you feeling?" she asked, setting her purse down. "A bit better," I lied smoothly, turning to serve the chili into bowls. My voice betrayed nothing, and I was proud of that. Acting normal around her was a challenge, but I summoned every ounce of my self-control. She came over and hugged me from behind, resting her head on my shoulder. I went rigid for a split second, then forced myself to relax so she wouldn't notice. It felt like an actress putting on a show of affection. Chili smells great. Thanks for making dinner," she said softly. "No problem," I replied. Inside, anger flared that she dared to touch me with such familiarity after being in another man's arms. But I breathed steady and led us to the dining table. Over dinner, Mary chatted about trivial things. A new project at her nonprofit. Something funny a coworker said. I nodded and gave short, neutral responses. I must have seemed a bit quiet, but I did have the excuse of not feeling well. She didn't press much. Maybe she was simply relieved I wasn't paying too much attention to her comings and goings. Her apparent ease disturbed me. How could she lie so effortlessly? Perhaps, I thought, our whole life had been full of small lies I never caught. The thought hurt, but I locked it away for now. As she talked, I occasionally caught a glimpse of something in her expression. Was it guilt, worry? Or was she completely fine, believing I was oblivious? I wasn't sure. Mary had always been somewhat hard to read when it came to deeper feelings. She mastered the art of a pleasant facade from her years schmoozing donors for her charity. I realized ironically that we were now both wearing masks at this table, each pretending everything was fine, when in reality an invisible knife lay between us. That night, I went to bed early, claiming lingering headache and avoided any intimacy. Mary didn't push, just gave me space. I lay in the dark, wide awake, with her form curled on the other side. I wondered if she was texting him even now, saying goodnight. The thought made me clench my fists under the covers. But I maintained my act of mild indifference. In the solitude of my mind, a mantra repeated: patience, plan, prepare. Every gentle breath she took in sleep only reinforced my resolve. The preparations were underway. The evidence was building. It was all I could do not to accelerate the timeline, but I knew better. No half-baked scheme would suffice. I needed a foolproof plan to truly get my revenge. They thought they were clever, hiding in plain sight. But I was becoming the wolf at their heels, watching, analyzing, getting ready to strike when they least expected. In that thought, I found solace enough to finally drift into a light, fitful sleep. Chapter 3. Laying the Trap. Over the next several weeks, I lived a double life. By outward appearances, I was the same mild-mannered Jack, going about my daily routine. I went to work, shared polite conversations with Dan, came home to Mary's company, and even managed a few smiles here and there. But underneath that normalcy, every day was a mission. I was collecting evidence, mapping out traps, and tightening the noose around two oblivious traitors. It wasn't easy. Seeing Dan at the office nearly every day was a special kind of torture. The first morning I went back after learning the truth, I remember walking into our firm's sleek office lobby downtown, heart hammering. I'd half expected to feel an uncontrollable rage at the sight of him. But something curious happened. I felt almost nothing as I greeted him. I had compartmentalized my anger for the sake of the plan. I wore a mask of friendly normalcy so convincing it even surprised me. "Feeling better?" Dan asked, concerned, referring to my supposed illness. He looked the picture of a caring friend, blue eyes steady behind his designer glasses, his tone warm. How practiced the liar must be. "Yeah, much. Must have been a 24-hour bug," I shrugged. "Thanks for covering yesterday." The words felt bitter on my tongue, thanking him for anything, but I delivered them casually. "Anytime, what are friends for?" he replied without irony. The sheer audacity of it blew my mind, but I smiled thinly and went to my desk. Every day that followed, I observed him quietly. Some days I'd catch him texting under the table during meetings, likely to Mary. He started taking long lunch breaks out of the office more frequently. On a hunch, I checked our shared business calendar. He'd often put a vague client meeting note during those long lunches. I'd cross-reference that with the PI's updates later. The updates. Each evening, after Mary fell asleep or when I could slip away, I'd review whatever Rob, the PI, sent me. It was like tearing the wound open repeatedly, but I forced myself to read and watch him passively, training myself to see it as evidence, not emotion. And evidence there was, plenty of it. Photographs of Mary and Dan meeting at various spots around Atlanta. A weekday lunch at a cafe in Inman Park. Mary getting into Dan's car outside her office. The two of them entering the Regis Hotel on another Friday afternoon when Mary had claimed she was attending a work seminar. That set made my blood boil. One photo showed them at the hotel's front desk, another captured them holding hands in the elevator, and a final 1 hour later of them leaving, hair mussed, looking pleased with themselves. The PI even managed to get a timestamp shot of them kissing in the parking garage next to Dan's car, clearly showing their faces. It was damning beyond doubt. He also placed a GPS tracker under Mary's car with my permission. The log showed several detours that matched times and locations of Dan's whereabouts, confirming patterns of meetups. On a couple of occasions, I arranged excuses to be away, like telling Mary I had a business dinner, only for the PI to confirm she went straight to see Dan. Each confirmation hurt, but also strengthened my resolve to utterly smash their little world. Beyond the affair itself, I had the PI quietly investigate Dan's activities in our company. I hadn't initially considered this strongly, but after suggesting the possibility to Rob, his team found interesting tidbits. Dan was our CFO, and while I trusted him blindly before, now I began auditing things behind the scenes. I discovered a $50,000 discrepancy in our accounts, money that had been moved out of a company expense fund into what looked like a Shell consulting invoice. After some digging, I realized the Shell company was controlled by none other than Dan. He had been siphoning off small amounts for at least a year, laundering it as consultant fees. I remember staring at that discovery on my screen and disbelief turning to savage glee. Dan was not only a cheating friend, he was a white-collar thief. He thought he was clever, but numbers don't lie when scrutinized. I scheduled a quiet meeting with our external auditor, without Dan's knowledge, and provided documents to initiate a thorough review. I framed it as a routine mid-year audit. The auditor, a sharp-eyed woman named Priya, promised to discreetly look for any anomalies. I didn't tell her my suspicions about Dan yet. I didn't want to tip that hand too soon. But I guided her to the suspicious transactions. Meanwhile, I also fed the PI any info I had about Dan's finances. Rob found out Dan had a private investment account I wasn't aware of, And interestingly, around the same time money went missing from our firm, Dan's account saw similar deposits. Everything was lining up for fraud charges if I wanted to go there. I was playing a dangerous game, balancing personal revenge with business matters. But I kept careful, ensuring Dan or others noticed nothing. If Dan got wind that I was sniffing around the books, he might panic early. Luckily, he was too preoccupied with sneaking around and likely assumed I'd never suspect my bro. Mary, on the other hand, occasionally raised an eyebrow at my cooler demeanor, but I generally blamed work stress or fatigue. We weren't fighting. I just wasn't as attentive, which she oddly seemed to accept given she might have felt some guilt and preferred me distant. Sometimes I think she tried to assuage guilt by being extra nice. She'd bring home my favorite takeout unprompted, or suggest we go see a movie. I usually declined, claiming workload. It's not that I didn't want to spend time with her. I couldn't without risking snapping. Instead, I let her think I was just busy. It gave her more freedom to slip away to Dan, which ironically played into my hands, letting them dig their grave deeper. Emotionally, those weeks were hellish. Pretending everything was fine with two people who were stabbing me behind my back required me to compartmentalize like never before. There were nights I'd excuse myself to the bathroom, run the sink, and just stare at my face in the mirror, reminding myself not yet, stay in control. I'd breathe deeply until the urge to scream or cry passed. One late night, Mary was already asleep and I was in the study reviewing some PI footage from that day. It was video from a PI's covert camera. Dan and Mary in her car at a park by the Chattahoochee River, kissing and laughing, her head on his shoulder. I watched it in silence, feeling my heart like a stone. In the background, the Atlanta skyline was visible, a reminder of where we were. They seemed carefree, happy even. I wondered, were they planning a future together? Did they whisper about loving each other? The thought turned my stomach, then ignited a vengeful spark. If they dreamed of a future built on the ashes of my trust, I would make those dreams impossible. I considered what to do with all this evidence. The divorce attorney, Angela, was astounded at our next meeting by the sheer amount of proof I had compiled in a short time. In her modern high-rise office, I laid out photos, timestamps, financial records. It was a compelling dossier. Well, I have to say, I rarely see a client come so prepared, Angela said, adjusting her glasses as she perused an incriminating photo of Mary and Dan entering a hotel room. She looked up at me. You have more than enough to nail her in divorce court. Adultery, misuse of marital funds for the affair, you name it. She'll be left with nothing. Possibly you could even go after attorney fees paid by her given this conduct. I nodded, my face impassive as I looked at a picture of the woman I once loved entwined with my friend. I want to go scorched earth, I said quietly. I'm not interested in amicable anything. I want to ensure she gets no financial gain from me, and if possible, that this entire affair ruins her reputation too. Angela gave a thin smile. I understand. We can definitely file for divorce on grounds of adultery. Georgia may be a no-fault state generally, but proving adultery will bar any alimony and sway asset division your way. As for reputation, well, divorces are public record, but we could also position things such that the ugliness is not easily hidden. She tapped the photo stack. Sometimes just having all this come out in court is enough. She might prefer to settle quietly once she realizes she's cornered. But if it's war you want, war you'll have. Her confidence boosted me. This was the legal front of my revenge. Divorce warfare. We discussed strategy, when to file, how to serve Mary the papers dramatically, perhaps at work to catch her off guard, as that could embarrass her. I also mentioned Dan's involvement. Angela noted that while I couldn't sue Dan directly for the affair, alienation of affection suits are not allowed in Georgia, I could still exact revenge by other means. If he's complicit in any financial misconduct, we could refer that to authorities or pursue separate civil action for any losses to you, she advised. I then brought up Dan's potential embezzlement from our firm. Angela's eyes widened at the additional betrayal. That's a criminal matter, potentially. If you have evidence, we should involve law enforcement or at least use it as leverage. I grinned without humor. Oh, I intend to. I'm planning to hand it over to the police once I have everything lined up, but I might also use it to lead him on a bit first. She raised an eyebrow but didn't pry. Attorneys typically focus on the case, not vigilante motives. We agreed on a timeline. I'd let her know when to file. We were essentially ready whenever I gave the green light. I wanted to coordinate my strike so that Mary and Dan wouldn't have time to warn or help each other. Coordination was key. I imagined it like toppling dominoes, each piece falling and knocking the next in swift succession, leaving nothing standing at the end. I penciled a mental date for the offensive, mid-September, about a month away. By then, our firm's audit would likely be concluding, providing formal evidence of Dan's malfeasance. It was also around Mary's birthday, ironically. She'd never see it coming if I dropped the hammer then. Part of me relished the cruelty of that timing, a birthday present of sorts. Happy birthday, here's divorce papers and public exposure of your sins. But I also wanted every detail in place. In the meantime, I decided to set some small traps to test them and gather final pieces. For instance, I began leaving certain documents around at work to see if Dan snooped, a non-disclosure form with dummy info about a lucrative project that might tempt him. And at home, I fabricated a scenario. I told Mary I was considering a big investment that could pay off huge. I made it sound like I'd come into a lot of money soon. I wanted to see if that news traveled to Dan, to gauge if they were planning something like running off together or if Dan had motives beyond love, such as financial. Sure enough, 2 days after I casually mentioned a potential windfall to Mary over dinner, a fake deal I made up about selling some company shares, Dan at work asked me about it. Hey, Mary said you were looking at selling your stake in that real estate venture for a good sum. That true? I hid my inner triumph. Mary spilled my made-up business to him immediately. Oh, it's just exploratory, I said lightly. Nothing certain yet. Dan gave a half smile. Well, if it pans out, drinks on you, huh? Of course, I replied, forcing a chuckle. Inside, I thought, so they are sharing everything, planning their futures, perhaps. It confirmed for me that Mary was emotionally, and maybe practically, aligning with Dan, not me. That stung, but also reinforced that neither deserved mercy. One evening, things nearly went off script. Mary and I were watching a show on Netflix, something we did occasionally to keep up appearances. Out of nowhere, she muted the TV and said, Jack, you've been so busy and distant lately. Are we okay? Her eyes searched mine. It was perhaps the first time in weeks she confronted my behavior. My heart rate spiked, fearing I'd slipped somehow. I carefully put on a tired, reassuring smile. Sorry, honey. Yeah, I know I've been distant. Work has been demanding. The new clients and all? I rubbed my temples for effect. I'm just worn out. Why do you ask? She looked down, as if embarrassed. I worry I've done something to upset you. You know, sometimes I feel a bit of tension. I wanted to scream. Of course I'm tense. I know you're sleeping with Dan. But I maintained my mask. I reached out and held her hand gently. It took effort not to recoil at the touch. I'm not upset with you, Mary. I'm sorry if it felt that way. I guess I've been in my own head too much. She squeezed my hand, looking relieved but also guilty. It's okay. I just needed to hear that. I love you, you know. Her voice wavered slightly on those last words. I swallowed. Was that a pang of conscience from her? It almost sounded like she was asking for forgiveness in code. I love you too, I lied softly, feeling the hypocrisy sour in my mouth. She leaned her head on my shoulder then, and we stayed like that, finishing the episode in false domestic bliss. Inside, my heart felt like stone. Part of me hated her in that moment, for saying she loved me while deceiving me so cruelly. Part of me pitied her for not realizing what storm was coming. And a tiny part, one I was trying to extinguish, still loved who I thought she was. That part nearly made me second-guess myself. Nearly. When she went to bed, I remained on the couch staring blankly at the dark TV screen after the credits rolled. Doubt tried to creep in. Was I doing the right thing by ruining her entirely? Could there be any chance of reconciliation? Did I even want that? I thought about forgiveness. Some couples overcame infidelity, people said. But this was beyond a stray mistake. It was an ongoing, elaborate betrayal by two loved ones. How could I ever trust either again? No, forgiveness was a fantasy. They didn't seek my forgiveness anyway. They were perfectly content to keep me in the dark indefinitely. The only reason Mary was half asking if we were okay was probably her guilt causing paranoia, not a genuine confession. The doubt hardened back into resolve. This path was chosen when they first made the decision to betray me. I was just following it to its logical, bitter end. In those quiet hours, I jotted down the final blueprint of my plan. Step 1. Finalize evidence gathering. PI was wrapping up. We had enough, but more doesn't hurt. Step 2. Initiate divorce filing without warning. Serve Mary in a shocking manner, possibly at her workplace or when Dan is present, for maximum effect. Step 3. On the same day or immediately after serving, expose Dan's fraud to authorities and his ouster from the company. Possibly coordinate with a moment that humiliates him publicly, like an arrest at the office or at least a confrontation. Step 4. Social exposure. Ensure friends, family, and possibly their workplaces know what they've done. This could be via sending copies of evidence anonymously or a well-timed reveal. Perhaps a group email with a few key photos to those who matter to them. Step 5. Legally ensure Mary is left with nothing through divorce proceedings, and Dan faces legal consequences, fraud charges, lawsuit for breach of fiduciary duty, etc. Step 6. Emotionally break them. This would happen as a result of above, but I also considered a direct confrontation once they were cornered, perhaps to deliver some final verbal blows when they can't hide or retaliate. I also considered the sequence carefully. The moment Mary gets served or the affair is out, she'd surely contact Dan and vice versa, in panic. I needed to ensure by then Dan was also so deep in his own crisis, like police at his door, or him losing his job and possibly his wife finding out, that neither could help the other. I wanted them isolated and desperate. As for Dan's wife, Linda, I hadn't mentioned her much. They didn't have kids. I debated whether to inform her before or after. She deserved to know, but I feared if I told her too early she might confront Dan, and then Dan would warn Mary or take defensive steps. So unfortunately, she became a piece in the chess game too. I decided she'd find out the day of the reveal as well, perhaps slightly before it went fully public so she wouldn't be blindsided publicly. Finally, I planned a little extra twist. Mary and Dan's relationship thrived in secrecy. What if I could sow distrust between them at the last moment? Perhaps feed each of them a lie about the other's loyalty. For instance, after serving Mary, I could imply Dan sold her out to save himself, especially if he gets busted for fraud. I could say he tried to pin blame on her or use her as alibi. And to Dan, maybe I could hint Mary confessed to everything or threw him under the bus in divorce filings. If they felt betrayed by each other too, it would be poetic. It might be more complexity than needed, but if an opportunity arose, I wouldn't hesitate to twist the knife. The stage was set. By early September, I had nearly everything ready. The audit findings came in. Priya found evidence of Dan's little embezzlement scheme and a formal report was prepared for the board, which basically was me and Dan, but I had looped in our company's attorney quietly as well. I told her to sit on it for a week until a board meeting I'd schedule, one that Dan would not see coming. The PI was basically done. Any further evidence was just an embarrassment of riches. I took one particularly damning video. A clear shot of Mary and Dan walking into a Marriott downtown, kissing in the lobby. The PI had posed as a bellhop to film it. That, combined with photos, I saved on a secure drive, labeled and dated meticulously for easy reference. Angela had the divorce petition drafted, citing adultery explicitly with attached exhibits of evidence. Reading through the document gave me chills. My life turned into legal language and exhibits. But it was the sword I'd strike with. Everything hinged on precise timing now. I felt like a general planning a covert strike. And then, a trigger event presented itself that I knew I had to use. Dan's birthday was coming up right before Mary's. He planned a dinner out with a group of our friends, including me, Mary, and yes, his wife Linda, who was still in the dark. He invited us all to a nice restaurant in Midtown. The sheer normalcy of him expecting us to all dine together, smiling, while he was screwing my wife behind our backs. I knew then I wanted that night to be part of my climax. What better moment to drop at least part of the bomb than when all our mutual friends were gathered? Perhaps not the full exposure, but maybe a seed. However, doing it in front of a crowd could get chaotic. Another approach? Attend the dinner, act normal, but later that night or next morning unleash everything. I decided to let the birthday dinner happen as a final act of their charade. It would be the last time they'd enjoy such normalcy before I flipped their world. In a dark way, I wanted to savor seeing them clueless in the same room with me, thinking they'd gotten away with it. The dramatic irony would be delicious knowing what I was about to do the next day. Little did they know, it was their last supper of sorts. I confirmed to Dan we'd be there. Mary seemed a bit nervous about attending with Linda around. I suspect guilt. Maybe she found it awkward to face the woman whose husband she was sleeping with. But she couldn't exactly refuse a birthday dinner for Dan without raising suspicion. So she agreed, albeit with what I sensed was some apprehension. The night of the dinner, I played my role to perfection. We gathered at a chic restaurant with skyline views. The group was about 10 people, some of Dan's and my old college buddies and their spouses, plus Mary and Linda. I toasted to Dan's health, even patted his back like a good friend. I could see Mary out of the corner of my eye, watching me carefully as I interacted with Dan. Maybe some part of her worried I'd sense something, if only she knew I sensed everything. Dan was in high spirits, laughing, ordering expensive wine, perhaps unknowingly with some of the money he stole. He sat between Linda and another friend while Mary was across from him. I deliberately placed myself next to Mary to keep up appearances and to watch them both. If one didn't know better, everything seemed perfectly cordial. I caught only a couple of fleeting glances between Mary and Dan, quite subtle, but I caught them because I was looking. Probably little reassuring looks that they still had their secret. It took restraint not to leap across the table and wipe that hidden smugness off their faces. Soon, I told myself, sipping my wine to hide a smirk. At one point, Linda, blissfully unaware, clinked a glass and teased Dan. "Hey, birthday boy, how's 38 feel? Any new adventures on the horizon?" Dan chuckled. "Oh, I think this year will be full of surprises," he said. I nearly choked on my drink at the irony. Mary squeezed my hand lightly under the table, a gesture she sometimes did in public to appear loving. I squeezed back just as lightly, wondering if she felt how cold my hands were. I was so close to the moment of truth, adrenaline was flowing. As dessert was served, I took a moment to look around the table. These were friends who had known us as happy couples for years. In a few hours, their phones would likely light up with scandalous news. This dinner was like the final scene of Act 1, where the audience knows something climactic is about to erupt in Act 2 or 2. And I was the director of it all. We parted ways in the parking lot, lots of hugs, and "let's do this again" lies. I hugged Dan even, wishing him happy birthday one last time with a grin that he probably thought was genuine. Mary hugged Dan too, briefly, whispering something like happy birthday softly. I wondered if she got him a personal gift separately, and whether that was in his car or a hotel room. The PI hadn't indicated any meetup that day beyond the group dinner, so maybe not. On the drive home, Mary was quiet. Then she commented, "That was nice, but I felt so tense for some reason." "Oh? Why tense?" I asked, staring at the road, controlling my voice. She shrugged. "I don't know, just a weird vibe. Maybe it's because Linda was there, and I always feel like I should talk to her more. We're not as close as I'd like." Her lies were getting weaker. I could sense the conflict in her. Perhaps being around Linda, whom she deceived, weighed on her conscience tonight. "Good," I just replied. "Well, you can always reach out to her for a coffee or something. I'm sure she'd like that." My casual suggestion made Mary wince just a little. She nodded non-committally. We got home and Mary went to shower. I took that time to prepare the payloads. Emails, files, messages that I'd send out the next day. I double-checked a draft email I had in my private account addressed to a list of our close friends and family, including Linda and a couple of Mary's family members who mattered. Her parents, who adored me, and her sister. The email was brief and devastating. Subject: truth about Mary, last name, and Dan, last name. I write this with a heavy heart, but everyone deserves to know the truth. My wife, Mary, and my trusted friend, Dan, have been engaging in an extramarital affair for the past X months. I have gathered extensive evidence of their deceit, including photographs and communications. It pains me deeply, but I believe the only way to move forward is with honesty. Attached, you will find a few pieces of evidence that make the situation clear. I'm sharing this not to gossip, but to explain the upcoming fallout. I will be pursuing a divorce from Mary on grounds of adultery, and I imagine this will also deeply affect Dan's marriage and standing. I am sorry to share such distressing news, but I could not in good conscience allow their duplicity to continue under false pretenses among our friends and family. This is a very difficult time for me. I appreciate your understanding. Jack? I reread it, checking the tone. It was calm, factual, and attached were two of the most clear photos, the hotel kiss, and them entering the hotel hand in hand. I decided not to attach a video for now. Photos were enough to shock, and video could be overkill and also risk more distribution than needed. The point was to publicly shame and isolate them, not make porn for others. I had similar content prepared specifically for Linda, in case the group email felt too impersonal for her. I contemplated if I should have told her personally. She was likely the biggest collateral damage after me. But I honestly didn't have the emotional bandwidth to console her when I myself was running on vengeance fumes. Perhaps Angela or one of our mutual friends could support her after. I also drafted a message to Mary's boss at the nonprofit. Risky, but I phrased it carefully that Mary had been misusing work hours for personal escapades and attached a photo of her and Dan during one of those midday meetups. I didn't accuse her of crime, just unprofessional conduct. The boss was a staunch older woman who took the nonprofit's reputation seriously. Even if they didn't fire Mary, it would embarrass her thoroughly at work, perhaps costing her promotions or at least trust. I knew this was a low blow. Mary's job wasn't directly related to me, but I was beyond holding back. Actions have consequences. Finally, I had prepared all the documents for the next day. Divorce papers ready in an envelope. Another envelope with copies of evidence for Mary herself, in case she tried to deny. The audit report and evidence of Dan's fraud ready to hand to the police and to confront him at our impending board meeting. A resignation letter for Dan that I drafted in case he'd prefer to quietly step down. Ha, fat chance after what I'd do. But it was part of the charade. I'd offer him a false out, maybe. Additionally, I had arranged with Rob, the PI, a little theatrical touch. He had printed a dozen glossy photos of Mary and Dan, the worst ones, for me, which I now had in a folder. Tomorrow, I would set these dominoes falling. I barely slept that night, not from sadness like before, but from anticipation. Each time I closed my eyes, I visualized the moments to come. Mary's face, when she realizes I know everything. Dan's shock when he's caught at both infidelity and fraud. The chaos as both their lives collapse. I felt a twinge of guilt for deriving such dark satisfaction from it, but I justified it remembering every tear and heartbreak I endured while they laughed behind my back. They deserve everything they're going to get, I affirmed to myself. In the darkness of early dawn next to a wife I no longer knew, I let a cold smile slip on my face. The night felt eerily calm, the final calm before the storm I was about to unleash. Tomorrow, justice would be served ice cold. Chapter 4. The Execution, Part 1. The Divorce Ambush. The morning of the reckoning dawned bright and deceptively peaceful. A typical Atlanta autumn day, sun filtering through orange-tinged leaves. The world looked unchanged, but I felt electrified knowing by day's end everything would be different. I dressed in one of my sharpest suits. I wanted to feel confident and look the part of someone in control. Mary commented, "You're looking spiffy. Big client meeting today?" I adjusted my tie in the mirror and smiled faintly. "Yeah, something like that." My heart was pounding, but I kept my outward demeanor casual. We went through our normal routine with surreal normality. Coffee, toast, a brief kiss on the cheek as we both headed out. She to her office, me ostensibly to mine. Little did she know, that kiss was a goodbye. My first stop, the courthouse downtown. Angela, my attorney, had arranged everything to file the divorce petition first thing. I met her outside the Fulton County Clerk's office to sign the final papers. It was quick. A clerk stamped the documents and it was officially filed. My marriage was now on a countdown clock. Mary just didn't know it yet. Next, I headed to Mary's workplace with the envelope containing her copy of the divorce complaint and summons. I had decided to serve her personally. Normally, a process server or sheriff does it, but I needed, to see her face. It was a risky move emotionally, but also an opportunity to confront her in a controlled way. Mary worked at a charitable foundation housed in a restored Victorian building near downtown. I arrived just after 9 a.m., envelope in hand, adrenaline coursing. In my pocket, my phone was ready with a recording app on. Georgia is a one-party consent state for recordings, and I wanted a record of the encounter in case she later claimed anything in court. I walked in and greeted the receptionist with a calm smile. "Hi, I'm here to see Mary." She recognized me. Spouses had come by before. Oh, hi, Jack. Mary's just in her office. Shall I ring her? I shook my head, trying to maintain a neutral pleasantness. No need, I wanted to surprise her. I'll knock. I made my way down the hall, heart thudding in my ears. Her door was ajar. I paused to collect myself. This was it. I pushed the door open gently and stepped in. Mary looked up from her computer, surprised. Jack, what are you doing here? She smiled, but there was confusion in her eyes. Maybe a touch of worry. Spouses don't usually drop in mid-morning without reason. I closed the door behind me. It was just us. She noticed the serious look on my face and stood up slowly. Is everything okay? For a second, I just looked at her, taking in the face of the woman I had loved and the reality of what she'd done. Her features were anxious now, perhaps sensing something was off. That moment felt like time stretched, two paths diverging, one where I broke down and begged her why. Why? But I chose the other path, the one of cold resolve. No, Mary, everything is not okay, I said quietly. I took the envelope out and held it visible. It was thick with the papers inside. My hand was steady. I came here to give you this. She glanced at the envelope, not understanding yet. What is that? Open it, I replied, my voice firm. With nervous hands, she took it and peeled it open. As she pulled out the sheaf of documents, the title was right on the first page in bold. In the Superior Court of Fulton County, Petition for Divorce. Her eyes went wide as dinner plates. She looked at me in pure shock. Jack, what is… Her voice caught in her throat. She frantically flipped through pages and suddenly several photos slipped out. Angela had included a couple of the photographic exhibits in the served copy. They fluttered to the floor between us, snapshots of her and Dan in flagrante. Mary froze, as if her brain couldn't compute what she was seeing. A blush of panic and shame crept up her neck and cheeks. She opened her mouth, but no words came out for a second. I broke the silence. I know, Mary, I know everything. My words were like drops of ice water. The lies, the affair with Dan, all of it. I've known for a while. Her legs seemed to give way and she sank slowly into her chair, staring up at me with a face that will forever be burned into my memory. An amalgam of terror, guilt, and disbelief. Jack, She started in a whisper, eyes filling with tears. I didn't let her gather any sympathy. I'd rehearsed what I wanted to say to her, keeping it short and controlled. I trusted you. I loved you, Mary, and you threw it away for him. I practically spat the last word. My voice was shaking despite my efforts. The hurt was bleeding through. I gave you everything, and behind my back you made a fool of me. She shook her head vigorously, tears spilling. It's not like that. I never meant to hurt you. She was choking on her words, panic rising. Please, can we talk about this? Not here. Her eyes flickered to the door. I realized she was afraid coworkers might walk in or hear. Good, the fear of public exposure was sinking in. She reached out as if to touch my hand, but I stepped back sharply. I couldn't bear her touching me now. It made my skin crawl. There's nothing to talk about, I said coldly. It's done. I filed for divorce this morning. I gestured at the papers, now trembling in her grip. Adultery, Mary. In Georgia, that means you get nothing. No alimony. And I'll be sure the court sees these pictures of you two living it up on our dime. She looked down at the photos scattered across her lap and desk and let out a soft sob, quickly covering her mouth. Oh my God. It was sinking in that her nightmare scenario was real. Jack, please, she begged, voice cracking. I'm so sorry. I made a mistake. A white-hot anger surged in me momentarily seeing her pleading. How dare she cry now after what she did? I leaned in slightly, keeping my tone measured but dripping with contempt. A mistake. A mistake is one night, a drunken slip. This was a calculated, repeated betrayal for months. In our bed, in hotels, while I was at work earning money that… You know what? I stopped myself. I realized I was raising my voice and took a quick breath. I continued, quieter but firm. I gave you my loyalty and you repaid me with lies. I have no sympathy for you right now. She was openly crying now, trying to stifle it to avoid making noise. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, she kept saying, shaking. It just happened. I didn't know how to stop it. I never wanted to leave you, I swear. The audacity. She wanted the affair and me as well, everything on her terms. Typical. I felt a surge of disgust. There's no coming back from this, Mary, I said. Maybe you didn't want to leave, but you sure didn't mind stepping all over our marriage. Well, you made your choice. Now these, I tapped the papers, are the consequences. We're done. She wiped her eyes, makeup smudging. Please, can we at least talk later? Privately? I need to explain. I cut her off, raising a hand. I don't want your explanations. There is nothing that justifies what you did. My voice hardened. However, there are a few things we do need to settle. She looked up, confused and afraid. I pressed on, adopting almost a businesslike tone. I expect you to move out of the house within the week. The house is in my name primarily, and I'll be keeping it. I've already spoken to a lawyer. As for your things, you can take whatever personal items, but don't even think of trying to claim anything beyond what you brought in. I have all our financial records locked down. Her mouth quivered. Jack, where am I supposed to go? Perhaps she expected me to feel pity at that, but I had anticipated this. I gave a thin, mirthless smile. Maybe Dan will take you in. That's up to him. But you won't be staying in my house, that's for sure. She closed her eyes in agony. Mentioning Dan twisted the knife. Good. Let her see reality. Her secret lover now her only lifeline. I'll go to my sister's for now, she murmured, seemingly dazed. Then her eyes widened. My God, my family, my parents, what will... I didn't let her finish. They'll find out soon enough, everyone will. My tone was almost casual. I'm not interested in protecting your reputation. Frankly, I've informed a few people already. That was partly true. I hadn't sent the big email yet, but this would rattle her. She paled. Who? You told? You'll find out, I snapped, then regained composure. I didn't want to devolve into shouting. In a controlled voice, I added, Actions have consequences, Mary. You should have thought of that before sleeping with Dan. She broke then, shoulders shaking as she sobbed quietly into her hands. I watched, feeling a mix of triumph and, surprisingly, a tinge of sadness. This was a woman I once deeply cared for, now a broken mess. But I reminded myself she brought it on herself. My sympathy was minimal, but I'm human. Seeing anyone in despair, even an enemy, can tug the heart. I steeled myself against it, recalling the image of her kissing Dan. I decided against prolonging the scene. I'd delivered the main blow. One thing remained, a little warning. Don't try to destroy evidence or lie your way out of this with others, I said. I have copies of everything securely stored. Also, do not even think about retaliation. If you try anything reckless, remember that adultery is technically a crime in Georgia. I could make a case to have you charged if I wanted to push it. It's unlikely, but the statute allows 2 years for prosecution. That was mostly an intimidation tactic. As the source said, nobody's been prosecuted in ages. But she didn't know that offhand, likely. Her tear-streaked face looked genuinely frightened. I would never hurt you or anything. I'm so sorry, she whispered again. I'd had enough. I turned to go but paused at the door and looked back. There was one question that all the revenge in the world wouldn't answer. Something only she could answer. And maybe I needed to hear it for closure. Why, Mary? I asked softly, an edge of raw pain in my voice despite myself. Why did you do it? She looked up at me, eyes red and desperate. I don't know. I was lonely. You were always working, and Dan, he was there. One day it went too far, and then... She broke off, wiping her nose. It's not your fault, it's mine. I was weak and stupid. It just felt nice to be wanted, in a different way. And once it started, I was afraid to stop, afraid to lose. Everything. A pathetic explanation. She cheated because I worked hard, for us, and she wanted extra attention. I felt anger bubbling, but also an unexpected release. Her excuse only cemented how selfish it was, which oddly made the letting her go easier. There was no good reason, nothing redeeming it. I nodded slowly. Well, you lost everything anyway, I replied quietly. She winced as if slapped. I then left the office without another word, closing the door on her sobs. As I walked out past the receptionist, I gave a polite nod. I'm sure word would spread like wildfire in that office as soon as Mary composed herself. The shame of being served divorce papers at work under adultery grounds with evidence, she'd probably have to take leave or quit out of humiliation. One target down. I got into my car and allowed myself a deep exhale. My hands were shaking now that I was alone. I clenched the steering wheel to steady them. It was done. I had faced her and hadn't crumbled. A part of me felt an immense emotional weight lift. The lies were in the open, at least between us. But no time to waste. That was just the opening salvo. Next up, Dan. I checked the time, 10 a.m. Our board meeting at the company was set for 11, under the pretense of discussing the completed audit results. Dan would be there, expecting nothing amiss beyond maybe some financial talk. Our company's attorney and Priya, the auditor, were also set to attend, though Dan thought it was routine. I had also discreetly requested a local police detective I'd been in touch with, after sharing a tip about possible financial crime, to be on standby near our building around noon, in case things went how I expected. As I drove towards my office, I pressed the button on my phone to send the prepared mass email to friends and family. It whooshed out of my outbox. There was no turning back now. My phone almost immediately began blowing up with notifications, replies, shocked texts from friends, missed calls. I ignored them for now. I had bigger fish to fry immediately. Among them was one number I did pay attention to. Linda, Dan's wife, was calling me. I had not specifically warned her ahead, aside from her being on that email list. I felt a pang. Maybe I should have. I decided to pick up because she was innocent and hurting. I answered via car Bluetooth. Hello? Linda's voice came through shaky and upset. Jack, I just saw your email. Is this some kind of joke? Please tell me it's not true. She sounded on the verge of tears. My voice softened a bit. I'm so sorry, Linda. It's true. I wish it weren't. She let out a small wail and then stifled it. I can't believe it. Dan and Mary, how could... I had no idea. She was breathing unevenly. I didn't either for a long time, I replied. I found out recently and got proof. I'm sorry you had to find out like this. I didn't know how else to do it without tipping them off sooner. She sniffled. That son of a... She trailed off. What are you going to do? I've already served Mary divorce papers this morning, I said. And I'm about to confront Dan at work. Possibly have him arrested, honestly. I realized she might not know about the fraud part, but it didn't matter if she did. She deserved all the truth. Linda, there's more. Dan has been stealing from our company, embezzlement. I have evidence. So he's betrayed me on all fronts, she gasped. Jesus, I don't even recognize who I married. Her tone was of utter dismay and heartbreak. I pulled into my office parking at that moment. I'm heading into that meeting now. I'll likely have his ass handed to him today. Are you safe? Do you need anything? He's obviously at work now. Maybe don't be there when he gets home. She took a deep breath. I'm at my office. I think I'll leave. Go to my sister's. I don't want to see him. Thank you for telling me. I'm in shock. I know. Me too, I said. I'm sorry, Linda. I have to go now, but I'll call you later, okay? Okay, she whispered. Make him pay, Jack. Oh, I will, I assured her, and hung up. It was nearly 11. Showtime. Chapter 5, The Execution, Part 2, Downfall of a Friend. I walked into the office building and rode the elevator up to our firm's floor. My heart was thumping, but my mind was crystal clear. The scene with Mary had given me momentum. Now I had to confront the other traitor. In our small conference room, Dan was already seated, chatting with Priya, the auditor, and our corporate attorney, Mr. Feldman. They looked up as I entered. I forced a cordial smile and shook Priya's hand, greeted Feldman, then lastly met Dan's eyes as I took my seat opposite him at the small table. He looked normal, even jovial. Hey, Jack, everything all right? You look a bit flushed, he said casually. I realized I probably did carry some color from the adrenaline. I'm fine, I said. Ready to get this done? He assumed I meant the audit meeting. He gave a little smirk. Yeah, I'm sure Priya just has some numbers to throw at us. Let's hope we came out clean. Oh, the irony. Priya cleared her throat and began going over the audit summary. It was hard to focus on her words while sitting across from Dan, knowing in minutes I'd be dropping an atom bomb on his life. But I listened enough to catch the key points. Discrepancies in accounts, funds siphoned to a consultancy, irregular authorizations. As she spoke, Dan maintained a neutral expression at first, even a slight frown of concentration. But as the details grew more damning, I saw a sheen of sweat on his forehead. He adjusted his collar once. Feldman's face was impassive, as he already knew from me where this was going. Finally, Priya finished. Hey, and these transactions totaling approximately $178,000 over 3 years were not properly documented. Given the beneficiary account is tied to an entity controlled by Mr. Roberts, this raises serious concerns of financial misconduct. Silence. Dan let out a nervous chuckle. Now hold on, are we saying I stole money? He tried to sound incredulous, but his voice faltered slightly. I leaned forward, folding my hands. It looks that way, doesn't it, Dan? He shot me a quick glance, perhaps surprised I wasn't jumping to his defense. Jack, come on, you know me. There must be an explanation. Maybe an error, Priya interjected firmly. These findings were double-checked. It's not error. The funds were moved under false invoices to your side business account. Dan's face flushed. Yes, okay. I have a consulting LLC. I can explain those invoices. Please do, I said quietly, staring him down. He looked around the table and realized no one was on his side. Feldman was already sliding a document forward. Mr. Roberts, this is very serious. As counsel for the firm, I advise you to fully cooperate and explain, or we'll have to involve law enforcement. Dan's eyes darted to mine. Jack, are you seriously entertaining that I'd embezzle from us? We're partners. There was a tinge of panic in his voice now. I tilted my head. Partners, huh? Like how we're friends, I said with a chilly tone that only he would decipher, laced with meaning beyond the money. I saw confusion in his expression at that. He was stumbling. I did route some funds, but it was temporary. I intended to pay it back. I had some personal cash flow issues. I never meant to. I held up a hand. Stop. He fell silent. There was no need to let him wriggle with excuses. My face hardened. We both know what you did, Dan. Frankly, it disgusts me. I brought you into this company and you stole from it, from me. He opened his mouth, but I didn't relent. Years of friendship and my own pent-up anger lent weight to my voice. How long have you been doing this? From day one, all that talk of trust, all those times I let you handle the books while I brought in clients. You were lining your pockets, weren't you? Dan looked truly desperate now. Jack, it's not what you think. I had some debts. I was going to return the money once a big deal closed, I swear. I'm sorry, I messed up. He was pleading, but I felt nothing but contempt. Yes, you messed up, big time. I glanced at Feldman and gave him a slight nod. It was the signal. Feldman cleared his throat. Mr. Roberts, given this admission and the evidence, the company will move to remove you as an officer and will refer this matter to the authorities. In fact, right on cue, as arranged, there was a knock and the door opened. A plainclothes detective, whom I debriefed earlier, stepped in with a uniformed officer. Detective Haynes, APD White Collar Division, he introduced himself. Apologies for the intrusion, but I believe this meeting pertains to matters we're investigating. Dan's eyes went as round as saucers. Investigating? Jack? He started to stand, but the uniformed officer gestured for him to remain seated. Haynes produced some paperwork. We have sufficient evidence of embezzlement by Daniel Roberts, and we're prepared to execute an arrest if the allegations are confirmed here. This is insane, Dan blurted, looking between me, the lawyer, and now the cops. Jack, you called the police on me? I looked him dead in the eye. Yes, Dan, I did. My voice was cold as ice. Something shifted in his face, a realization that I was truly done with him, that no friendship remained to shield him. His expression turned from shock to anger. After everything, you'd do this to me? He snarled, perhaps playing to the audience to seem betrayed. Unbelievable. I gave a bitter laugh. That's rich coming from you. I couldn't hold back now, not after that indignation he tried to throw at me. I stood up slowly. Detective, would you give us a moment? I have something personal to address with Mr. Roberts before you take him. The detective looked at me questioningly. I assured, it's relevant. And it won't take long. Haynes nodded. All right, but we'll be right outside. Officer, hold here. He stepped out but kept the door slightly ajar. The uniformed cop stayed inside by the door. Priya and Feldman looked unsure if they should leave. I decided to let them stay. A small audience was fine by me. I leaned over the table, directly facing Dan. He had sunk back into his chair, perspiring and jittery. "You think I betrayed you by calling the cops?" I said in a low, dangerous voice. "No, Dan, you betrayed me. On multiple levels." He blinked rapidly, and I saw it click. The double meaning, the possibility that I might know about more than money. He licked his lips. "Jack, what are you talking about?" I took out my phone, tapped a few times, and tossed it on the table toward him. A photo of him and Mary in a passionate embrace at the St. Regis popped up on the screen. Clear as day. Feldman's eyes widened as he realized what it was. Priya put a hand over her mouth. The uniformed cop tried to keep a stoic face, but even he glanced startled. Dan looked at the phone and his face drained of all color. In that moment, he knew the jig was up completely. "Jesus," he whispered. I let the silence hang a second, then continued with venom. "You didn't just steal money, Dan. You stole my wife." He shot out of his chair, hands out in a placating gesture. "Jack, sit down." My voice was so sharp and commanding that even the cop flinched. Dan slowly sank back down, realizing I was far beyond the friend he could cajole. I spoke with quiet fury. "Was it worth it? All of it? The money? The sneaking around with Mary? Did you two have a good laugh at how stupid I was?" My composure was fraying now that it was all laid bare, but I kept enough control not to shout, just a controlled hiss. Dan's eyes filled with tears. The coward was actually crying now. "It wasn't like that. I never meant to hurt you." I barked a short, humorless laugh. "But you did. You hurt me more deeply than anyone ever has. And you know what, Dan? You're going to pay for it. In every way." He put his face in his hands, whether out of shame or just stress. "I'm sorry," he mumbled, voice cracking. "I'm so sorry, Jack." I found it pitiful. This once confident, charming guy reduced to a sniveling mess. But I had no sympathy left. "You're sorry because you got caught," I replied. "If I hadn't found out, you'd still be doing it. Both things. Don't pretend otherwise." He had no answer to that, just sobbed quietly. Our lawyer and the auditor were utterly silent, likely wishing to be anywhere else. But this needed witnesses, in a way. I wanted people to see the real Dan unmasked. I straightened up and addressed Feldman, back to a business tone. "Mr. Feldman, please proceed with whatever needs to be done regarding Mr. Roberts' removal from the company. I believe his shares and stake can be claimed as damages via the fraud clause in our partnership agreement?" Feldman, recovering his professionalism, nodded. "Yes, correct. Given the circumstances, the company can reclaim his equity and seek restitution." Dan looked up, alarmed. You can't take my shares." I gave him a hard stare. "Watch me. You forfeited them when you defrauded us. You forfeited any goodwill when you crawled into my wife's bed." He broke eye contact, staring at the table, defeated. I turned to the officer. "I think we're done here. Detective Haynes can continue the formalities. I will provide any further evidence needed to ensure Mr. Roberts faces the full extent of the law." The cop nodded and cracked the door open to signal the detective. Haynes returned, took in the scene. Dan's tear-streaked face, the tension in the room. Perhaps he surmised some of it. Haynes approached Dan. "Mr. Roberts, please stand up." Dan complied weakly. The officer pulled his hands behind him and began to cuff him. Dan suddenly looked at me, panic in his eyes, maybe the reality of arrest jolting him. "Jack, please don't do this. We can settle it between us. I'll pay back everything. I'll sign over my shares, anything. Just don't let them take me." I felt a momentary pang seeing him like that, but I remembered Mary's sobs that morning and my own nights of agony. I hardened. "No, Dan, actions meet consequences. I'm done shielding you." He started to resist as the officer secured the cuffs. "This is a mistake. We're friends," he yelled suddenly, voice echoing in the conference room corridor as they started moving him out. I followed a few steps behind as the police escorted him, with Priya and Feldman trailing awkwardly. Our employees outside the meeting, we had a small staff, were peeking in confusion. They saw their co-founder being let out in handcuffs. Murmurs started. Dan, now desperate, shouted, "He set me up! Jack did this!" Perhaps he was trying to salvage some pride or sow doubt. He looked back at me with something like betrayal, as if I wronged him. I calmly responded loud enough for everyone. "Set you up? All I did was uncover your lies, Dan. You set yourself up. As he was marched to the elevator, he kept babbling. It's not what it looks like. I'm innocent. Call my lawyer. But nobody was buying it. The evidence had spoken. I stood there, watching as the elevator doors closed on him. The last image of Dan being him slumped in cuffs between two officers. The hallway was silent, all eyes on me now. Our receptionist, a young woman, looked at me in shock. One of our junior analysts was like, "What happened?" I straightened my jacket and announced evenly, "Mr. Roberts has been caught engaging in serious misconduct against the company. He will no longer be with us. That's all I can say for now." Stunned faces, but also some knowing looks. Office gossip had hints he was living large beyond his means. I added, "Please continue with your work. If you have any questions or concerns, direct them to Mr. Feldman or myself later." As everyone slowly went back to their desks, I stepped back into the empty conference room to gather my things, feeling a whirlwind of emotions. The deed was done. I had delivered devastating blows to both of them in one morning. It was almost hard to process. Feldman patted my shoulder sympathetically. "Jack, I'm sorry about all this, and about your, personal situation." He had obviously realized Dan's betrayal wasn't just financial. I gave a curt nod. "Thank you. Just make sure everything is set legally to remove him and secure the company assets." "Of course," he assured. Priya quietly said, "I'll finalize the audit report for law enforcement and your records. Take care, Jack." When they left, I sank into a chair. I was alone now. I ran a hand through my hair, which was damp with sweat. It felt like I had fought a battle, and I had two battles simultaneously. Both victories, yes, but not without cost. I checked my phone. Dozens of new messages. My mass email had triggered a conflagration among friends and family. I skimmed. Expressions of shock, support from a few. "I'm here for you, man." Anger at Mary and Dan. Confusion. Mary's sister tried calling twice. Mary herself had texted a long string of messages I hadn't seen. From pleading, "Please talk to me," to apologetic. "Jack, I know you hate me, but I beg you to not do anything rash. We can figure something out." And finally one that said, "How could you email everyone? I'm ruined. Why are you doing this?" I ignored her. She still didn't get that she did this, not me. I saw one from an unknown number, turned out to be Mary's boss, a terse note. "We need to discuss your status at the foundation. Call me." I smirked grimly. So the boss got my message and evidence too. Mary's career was in jeopardy now on top of everything. Taking a deep breath, I realized a weird calm was coming over me. It was done. They were exposed and broken. A chapter of my life was violently closed in a single day. There would be fallout to manage, divorce proceedings, likely a criminal trial for Dan's fraud down the road, and the emotional aftermath among friends and family. But the war itself, the active phase, was over. And I had won. I gathered the incriminating files and papers strewn about. In the mess, I found something. Dan's phone. In the chaos, it must have been left behind or he dropped it. I picked it up. It was unlocked. The idiot used no password. Out of curiosity, I opened his messaging app and saw a recent thread with a contact named M. Mary. The last message from her was this morning around 9:30, presumably after I left her office. "Jack knows. He served me divorce at work. He has pictures. OMG, everything's falling apart. What do we do?" He hadn't replied. He was in the meeting then. I scrolled a bit and felt a stab of disgust at their lovey messages, complaining about me or coordinating meetups, but one thing made me stop. A message from Dan a couple days ago to her. "After my B-day, let's tell him. We can't keep hiding. I'll have news for him at work too, the audit maybe. Once the dust settles, we'll figure out a way to be together openly." They were thinking of telling me soon, it seems. Maybe he anticipated the audit exposing him and thought to come clean about the affair at the same time. Perhaps to distract me or mitigate. Mary's response to that was, "I'm scared, maybe not yet, but I don't want to keep lying. I hate hurting him." How noble, I thought sarcastically. Regardless, it was too little too late. And ironically, I beat them to the punch on all fronts. I tossed the phone aside. Perhaps I'd give it to the detective as evidence, or maybe to Linda. It was approaching noon. I stepped out into the fresh air outside the building. The city hummed as usual, indifferent to one man's personal drama. I felt a swell of release as I realized I didn't have to pretend anymore. Everyone knew. I could be openly angry or sad, and nobody would think it was unprovoked. I walked a few blocks to a small park plaza to clear my head. A couple of texts came from two close friends urging me to join them for a drink later, obviously having heard. I texted back a simple, yes, later. Maybe I could use a drink. Looking at my reflection in a building's glass, I saw a man who looked exhausted but somehow lighter. The hardest part was over. They were destroyed socially, reputationally, legally, emotionally, as I envisioned. Mary, publicly shamed among friends/family, likely losing her job, facing a brutal divorce giving her nothing, and emotionally wrecked from guilt and consequences. Dan. Reputation ruined. Everyone in our circle knew now he was a cheater and a thief. Career destroyed, fired, and likely going to prison for fraud. His marriage over, and even financially busted since he lost company shares and would owe restitution. They had each other, one might think. Perhaps, but that thought actually made me grin darkly. With everything out, what did they have? Dan was in jail now awaiting bail, facing years of legal battles. Mary was a pariah in her social circle and likely to struggle financially after divorce. If they tried to be together now openly, it would be under the worst circumstances. Two disgraced souls clinging to each other. The romantic fantasy would evaporate quickly in the face of the mess. I suspected their love wouldn't survive this crucible. Perhaps they would blame each other. Maybe Mary would resent Dan for the fraud bringing extra shame. Maybe Dan would resent Mary for me finding out or for his marriage ending. Perhaps they'd splinter apart under pressure, leaving each of them truly alone. That would be a fitting final twist. Even if they somehow stayed together, it would be a hollow victory for them. Two people bound by mutual guilt and ruin. Hardly a happily ever after. I found myself at peace with that. After a long sigh, I made one more call. It was to my therapist, someone I'd seen a few times after I discovered the affair initially to cope. I didn't tell anyone else, but a professional helped me channel my rage productively. I left a voicemail. It's done. They know I know. I think I'm okay, but I should probably schedule a session soon to unpack this. Taking care of my mental state after all this was important. I didn't want to become permanently bitter or vengeful in life beyond this, because now that the war was over, I had to think of the future. A future where these people were out of my life, and I could start anew. Standing there among lunchtime office workers milling about, I closed my eyes for a moment. I felt the sun on my face. It felt like the first sunlight after a long storm. I had won. But unlike most victories, it felt somber. There's no joy in having to nuke your own life to eradicate betrayal. Yet there was satisfaction, a grim, profound satisfaction that I hadn't rolled over as a victim. I had stood up and fought back with all my cunning and might. Some may judge me for the scorched earth tactics, but those who have had their heart torn out by betrayal might understand. I didn't physically harm anyone, but I dealt them the blows their actions deserved. And I did it intelligently, leaving little for them to fight back with. As I began walking back to my office, perhaps to pack up for the day, I wasn't going to get more work done after this anyway. My phone buzzed with an email notification from Angela, my divorce attorney. She informed me Mary had already contacted a lawyer and they'd be in touch. Likely Mary was scrambling to salvage anything. Angela said, given the evidence, Mary's side expressed a willingness to negotiate an out-of-court settlement, basically begging for mercy. I would consider it, but mercy was not high on my list. At best, I might not drag the divorce longer than needed if she agreed to all my terms swiftly. I replied simply that I'd meet Angela tomorrow to discuss, but my stance remained that Mary gets nothing beyond maybe her personal car and whatever she bought with her own salary. I stepped back into the building and saw a couple colleagues who gave me sympathetic nods. News travels fast. I gave a polite nod back. I felt no shame. Everyone knew I was the wronged party, and my decisive action likely earned some respect, even if awe at the drama. In my office, I sat down and glanced at a framed photo on my desk of me and Dan from a fishing trip years ago. I picked it up. We looked so happy, brothers in all but blood. I felt a pang of grief for that lost friendship, fake as it turned out to be. Without much thought, I dropped the frame in the trash bin. Past is past. I then noticed Mary's framed photo on my desk, too. She had given me one of her in a cute pose for my office long ago. That followed the first frame into the trash. I collected a few personal items, thinking I might take a few days off. I informed HR to formally terminate Dan's access and to announce his departure to the company by next day. The official reason, gross misconduct. Let people make of it what they will. Rumors will fill in the blanks. Before leaving, I locked my office and on the door removed the sign that said Jack, last name, and Dan, last name. Partners. I peeled his name off the decal. Now it was just me. Strangely, that felt empowering too. Walking out of the office for what might be the last time in a while, I allowed myself a small, genuine smile. Not one of gloating, but one of liberation. I whispered under my breath, "It's over. You did it." And indeed I had. Chapter 6. Epilogue. New Beginnings. 2 years later, a lot had changed. I sat on the back porch of a charming house in the Atlanta suburbs. My house, though it was new to me. Autumn leaves were falling, and the air had that crisp hint of the upcoming winter. Life was peaceful in a way I never imagined it could be again after the turmoil I went through. After the day of reckoning, everything proceeded mostly as planned. The divorce went through swiftly. Mary didn't contest much. I think she was too defeated and eager to avoid more public ugliness. The final decree cited adultery explicitly. She got no alimony, and I kept the house and the majority of assets. She walked away with a small settlement that we agreed on just to avoid trial. A token amount, basically enough for a few months' rent, likely courtesy of her family pleading her case. I didn't mind letting that go. It maintained my image of not being needlessly cruel, at least in legal record. Though some thought I'd been extremely harsh already. True to her word, Angela ensured I didn't pay a penny more than necessary. The judge looked at our evidence and was clearly on my side from the start. Mary was practically publicly rebuked in court when the judge noted her misconduct. Mary's life took a nosedive for a while. She moved in with her sister after I kicked her out. Her parents were devastated by her actions. I heard through the grapevine, since I cut direct contact, that she lost her job at the foundation. Apparently, the board quietly asked for her resignation, citing the tarnished reputation due to the scandal. The nonprofit world is built on trust, and an adultery scandal with evidence circulating did not sit well. She had trouble finding similar work and ended up leaving Atlanta about a year later, perhaps to start fresh elsewhere. I don't know where she is now, and honestly, I don't care much. Dan's fate was even more severe. He was indicted for fraud and embezzlement. The case dragged a bit, but faced with overwhelming evidence, some of which he practically admitted in the meeting and with paper trail, he took a plea deal. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison, with possibility of parole in 3, plus restitution of the money he stole. Needless to say, his career in finance was over. His wife, Linda, divorced him swiftly, armed with my evidence of adultery and his criminal charges, which made that straightforward. I met Linda once after everything, to apologize for the collateral hurt. We shared a coffee and some tears, but she didn't blame me. She said she was grateful I exposed the truth. She sold the home she had with Dan and moved back nearer to her parents in Tennessee. We kept an occasional touch as friends, coping with mutual betrayal. She's doing better now, even dating someone new. My company survived the scandal. In fact, after shedding Dan's duplicity, I steered it to better performance than before. Clients who heard whispers mostly sympathized with me. A couple who were closer to Dan initially were wary, but when news of his fraud became public record, they backed me fully. I eventually merged my firm with another to reduce any lingering stigma and rebranded entirely. It was part of moving on. I continued to run the new venture successfully, pouring my focus into it during those months after to distract myself and rebuild. As for me personally, the journey to healing was tough. In the immediate aftermath, I felt triumphant but also horribly empty. After the adrenaline faded, there were nights I sat alone in my big house, the one Mary and I shared, and felt an ache of loneliness and the ghost of betrayal. All the anger and chaos had kept me going. When things grew quiet, the sadness crept in. I had loved Mary deeply once, and Dan had been like a brother. Accepting the loss and treachery of both took time and therapy. I continued therapy regularly, determined not to let the bitterness define me. With Dr. Miller's help, I processed the grief. There were moments I doubted myself, moments I felt guilt wondering if I went too far. But each time, I concluded I had done what was necessary for my own justice and healing. Some mutual friends thought my public shaming of them was excessive, but those weren't true friends, and they fell away from my life. The ones who mattered understood or at least respected my actions given the circumstances. Eventually, I sold the old house. Too many memories in those walls. I moved to a new home on the outskirts of the city where I now sit on this porch. It's a smaller, cozier place with a big yard. A fresh start. And in this new home sits something I thought I might never have again. A new family. I glanced through the porch's screen door into the living room where my wife, yes, I remarried, is playing on the rug with our baby daughter. A sense of serene happiness fills me at that sight. 2 years ago, I would have scoffed at the idea of trusting someone with my heart again. But life has its ways of surprising you. Her name is Rachel. We met about a year after the divorce, introduced by a mutual acquaintance who figured two people who had seen rough times might hit it off. She knew about my saga, it was semi-public after all, and she had her own story of a broken engagement. We bonded over war stories of heartbreak, ironically, but we also found we had a real connection beyond that. Rachel is kind, empathetic, and was patient with me as I relearned how to let someone in. On our third date, I disclosed everything, worried she'd think I was some vengeful maniac. But she listened calmly and said, "You went through hell. You did what you thought you had to. I just hope it brought you peace." There was no judgment in her eyes, only understanding. That acceptance moved me deeply. Over time, she helped me see that not everyone would betray me, that I could still be loved for who I am without fear. It wasn't easy shedding the defensive armor I'd built, but for her, I wanted to try. We married quietly at a courthouse. I'd had enough of big weddings. And a year later welcomed our little girl, Hope. Cheesy as the name might sound to some, we chose it because that's what Rachel said I gave her and she gave me. Hope, after despair. Inside, I hear baby Hope giggle as Rachel tosses a soft toy in the air for her. I smile. My phone buzzes on the side table. A news alert. Something about corporate fraud sentencing. Funny that once would trigger me, but now I just dismiss it. The ghosts of that time don't haunt me much anymore. I do think back occasionally. I think of Mary. Where is she now? I heard she ended up working in a different state under her maiden name, trying to escape the scandal. I bear her no active malice now. In a strange way, I should thank them. That crucible forged me into a stronger person and led me to this better life. I truly hope she finds a measure of peace or growth, though I doubt we'll ever speak again. I don't miss her. The woman I loved became someone I no longer recognize. It's just a chapter closed. And Dan, by my estimates, he might be up for parole soon. I sometimes wonder what I'd do if he ever tried to apologize or contact me. Likely nothing. There's no friendship left to salvage. I suppose he has plenty of time in a cell to reflect on his choices. Perhaps he'll come out a changed man, perhaps not. That's not my concern anymore. I got what I needed. Accountability for his actions. Forgiveness? People ask if I've forgiven them. I think I have, in the sense that I no longer harbor rage. I wouldn't flinch if I heard Mary was dating or Dan was released. It's just irrelevant to me now. I won't forget, but I've let go of the poison inside me. As the saying goes, holding on to anger is like drinking poison. I released it all that day. I executed my revenge, and in the months that followed. Now my cup is empty of it, and I refill it with better things. I stand up and stretch, feeling the slight chill. Inside, Rachel notices me through the door and gives a warm smile, lifting Hope in her arms and waving her tiny hand at me. I wave back and head in to join them. I scoop my daughter into my arms and she babbles happily, grabbing at my finger. Such innocence and trust in those little eyes. I press a kiss to her forehead and put an arm around Rachel, drawing her close. She leans her head on my shoulder. In this simple domestic moment, I find that calm and satisfaction I craved. The war I fought is long over, and I came out not only victorious but wiser, and more importantly, free. Free to live honestly, love deeply, and trust again, albeit with discernment. I have a partner now who I know would never hurt me as I was hurt before, someone with whom I rebuilt my world on solid ground. And that, to me, is the ultimate victory that grew from all the ashes. As we stand there as a family, a thought crosses my mind. In the wild, a wolf who's won its battles doesn't dwell on them. It moves on to provide for its pack, to save her life. I had been the wolf when needed, patient, strategic, and relentless. I struck when the time was right and secured what was mine. Now it's time to leave the wolf's mentality behind and embrace the new chapter of peace. I look at Rachel and hope, and I feel something I hadn't felt in a long time during those dark days. Contentment. The satisfaction isn't just from settling scores. It's from knowing I rebuilt my happiness from ruins. Come on, Rachel says softly. Let's go inside. It's getting cold. I nod, giving one last glance out at the gently swaying trees. War's over, I think. And I won. Sure, I reply, smiling genuinely. Let's go in. We step back inside our cozy home, shutting the door on the autumn breeze and on the past. Together we move forward, leaving the shadows of betrayal behind us and embracing the warm light of hope and love that now fills my life. The end. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, so subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.